Police, we're still waiting on Anthony, so we can give it a couple minutes if you'd like.
Okay. We'll wait a minute or two. I accidentally signed on to the May 18th meeting and didn't understand why it wasn't starting.
I wonder if other people did the same. I hope not, but that is the thing that could happen when you have two meetings of the same variety in 1 month.
Yes.
Well, while we wait for Anthony, I will hop in and give a few meeting instructions for everybody. If this is your first time joining us on Zoom for one of our virtual committee meetings, or maybe the first time in a very long time and just need a refresher. So you'll notice right off the bat that you're currently muted and you're unable to unmute yourself on your own. This is so that we do not have any disruptions. So the only folks who will actually be unmuted at any given time are committee co-chairs, Anthony and Felice, who Anthony is now here, and our presenters from MSK. Following the presentation, the co-chairs will call on members of the public who wish to speak. You can participate by going to the reactions icon on your screen and pressing the raise hand button. It's not the wave or the thumbs up, as those will disappear. Only press it once. If you press it a second time, your hand will go back down. So if you're calling in from the phone, it's *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute whenever you're called on. Be on the lookout for a prompt asking you to confirm unmuting once one of the co-chairs calls on you. If you're having problems, the chat is available for technical support to help with the Zoom software. It is not to ask questions or make comments to the presenters or the co-chairs. They will never see those chats. If you're using an older version of Zoom, you'll need to go to the participants section where you'll find the raise hand feature there. And finally, we encourage you not to raise your actual hand or wave at the screen, as we may miss you and not be able to see you. So if you're having problems, chat me. I'm here for support. And with that, I will hand it over to Anthony and to Felice.
Thank you, Will. And welcome everybody tonight to the second of several task force meetings for the Memorial Sloan Kettering. I'd like to turn it over to Anthony as well. I have a noisy dog, so I'm going to be periodically just putting myself on mute, and I'll apologize up front, but welcome tonight. Anthony?
Okay, thank you, Felice. And thank you, Will, for your usually fine introduction. Okay, we have the topic today is the architectural response to the programmatic need, and we have a group from MSK, including their land use attorney, Shelley Friedman, and at least I think Shelley's there, it's hard to see. And so we can, in fact, I'm going to turn it over to him because they're going to make a presentation, and then we will have questions and comments. So thank you. Shelley?
We cannot hear you. As you were speaking, right. You are unmuted, but we cannot hear you.
Thank you. Well, I thought it was me.
How is this?
That's much better.
Much better.
Very, very good. No lawyer wants to stay on mute for very long. So I'm just really going to turn it over to Dr. Drebin. Dr. Drebin is the chairman of the surgical department and the acting president of MSK, and has been presiding from our side over these meetings. And I'm just going to let him continue in that role. Thank you.
Thanks, Shelley, and good evening, and thank you everyone for the opportunity to speak with you again today about the Pavilion project. I'm Jeff Drebin. I'm the chair of the Department of Surgery and also the acting hospital president at Memorial, where I'm pleased to say that I'm a busy surgeon and chair a department of really among the best surgeons in the world. We could have our perfect. For those who haven't been on prior calls, I want to share a bit of critical context for this project and why the Pavilion is so essential. This slide shows data from the CDC, and it shows that cancer rates in the United States will increase 50% over the next little over 25 years. And more importantly, we project that there will be 47,000 new cases in New York City by 2030 and 60,000 by 2050. 1 in 3 people, if we look around on this call, 1 in 3 of us will have cancer in our lifetimes. And in fact, that's a little bit of an underestimate. For men, it's 1 in 2, and for women, it's 1 in 3. And the data to the right in this slide, the bar graph, shows incidence of cancer now and in 2050. The light blue is in 2015, the dark blue is in 2050, by age group along the horizontal axis. And you can see that cancer is going to go up fairly dramatically. And it also shows that really our older population, those over 50, are most vulnerable because cancer is a disease of aging. And the incidence for most cancers goes up every decade of life. You can also see a sort of worrisome finding, though, on the left, which is the cancer in people under 50 is also on the rise, and particularly cancers of the colon, the breast, and prostate in young patients are being seen more and more often. And there's one other fact that's critical, and it's really part of the reason I've focused my life on cancer surgery. For patients with solid tumors, virtually all patients who are cured of their cancers have surgery as part of their treatment. It may include chemotherapy or radiation therapy or immunotherapy, but virtually all solid tumor patients wind up needing surgery to be cured. And so the need for cancer surgery is expected to increase along with the cancer incidence in our population. Next slide. So tonight we're here to talk about architectural and zoning responses to the program needs. This meeting is part of a series of meetings. You can see the next 2 and their schedules. We've planned with Anthony, Felice, Russell, and Will on these meetings, and these will take place. There are several others, I think, coming up in addition to these 2. At our first task force meeting 2 weeks ago, I had the chance to not only talk about some of the reasons we need the Pavilion so emphatically, but I had 2 of my colleagues here, Dr. Ginger Gardner and Yesenia Valentin Salgado, who also spoke to members of the community board. Tonight, next slide, please. Tonight, I'm grateful to have the opportunity to be here again, and I'm joined by a number of colleagues who can provide a deeper dive into the architecture and zoning actions for the project, which are something that I have to admit I'm not expert in. But I'm also joined by Elizabeth McNulty, our Director of Acute Care Nursing. And I will say, as I've said often, we do great surgery at Memorial Sloan Kettering. We do more cancer surgery than any other hospital in the United States. But the reason our patients do so well is our nurses. The nurses are our secret sauce. And the great nursing care that patients get here is really part of the key to the great outcomes our patients have. And I was going to call on Elizabeth now, who I believe is on a Zoom field, to say a few words.
I am. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Drebin. I am an oncology nurse. I've been a nurse at Memorial Sloan Kettering for 29 years. I'm currently the Director of Acute Care Services. So I oversee 9 inpatient units. 8 of them are in Memorial Hospital. 1 is in the Koch building. And over the years, I've seen great changes in how and where we deliver great oncology care to our patients. I've been a part of a number of opening projects, whether they were inpatient new units or some of our outpatient facilities, really looking to meet the growing and changing demands of our patients. I'm really excited to be here tonight to help illustrate how our needs and the care of our cancer patients are really changing, and answer any questions that you have. I think, as Dr. Drebin explained, our people are living longer with cancer, and what we're seeing is that we're trying to keep them very much in the communities at home as best we can. So when they arrive on our doorstep and they come to our hospital, they're very ill. They're quite sick. And we really need to be in a facility that can really help us provide the level of care and the changing level of care as the patient demands that throughout their stay in our hospital. Other really, I don't know if we'll talk about this later, but other things to consider is not just our physical space, but the technology and the equipment and the procedures that we want to be able to do for our patients very urgently and acutely, so that we can have just the best outcomes for our patients. Do you want me to keep going? Do you want me to say more?
I think we'll bring you back in, Elizabeth,
Okay.
as we get to some of the architectural details. I'm now going to turn it over to Amador Centeno, who is the Senior Vice President for Facilities Management and Real Estate Development, a friend and colleague who oversees all our physical plans, including real estate and construction. And he can introduce not only himself, but others who are involved in the technical design aspects of the project that I think we're going to really focus on tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Drebin, and thank you to the members of Community Board 8 for having us here. As Jeff just said, I'm Amador Centeno, and I'm responsible for all the operations and maintenance of all MSK properties, as well as the development and construction of new facilities. I'd like to begin by introducing the architecture firms that we selected to help us with the new pavilion and our thinking behind their selection. We conducted a comprehensive search that focused on some key attributes: knowledge of healthcare spaces, patient experience, clinician and staff experience, urban design, and the ability to contextualize those attributes into the fabric of the neighborhood that we reside. I'm happy that this process led us to the selection of two outstanding firms, Canon Design and Foster & Partners, both of which have offices here in New York City. Joining me today are Justin Boyer from Foster & Partners and Troy Hogard and Rob Masters from Canon Design. I'm excited for the opportunity to have them share with you tonight their thoughts for the new pavilion, along with their passion and expertise in healthcare design. With that, I will turn it over to Justin from Foster & Partners.
Thanks, Amador. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to give everyone a bit of context before we get into some of the clinical aspects of the design. This is an aerial view of the Upper East Side, which just shows all of MSK's existing facilities highlighted in a kind of purplish blue color. I think it demonstrates their commitment to the neighborhood and to the city at large. We're going to focus on that cluster of buildings in the center of the page, which is really the main campus situated between 66th and 69th Streets and First Avenue and York Avenue. Next slide, please. So here you can kind of see a zoomed in view of that aerial perspective. We're looking at two buildings in the center, which are highlighted in purple, which are the existing Sloan and Scholars buildings. Those sit on the site of the proposed pavilion project between 66th and 67th Street along York. Immediately to the left of those buildings in gray, you can see the existing Rockefeller Research Lab. And immediately to the right, you can see the existing Memorial Hospital. The proposed pavilion is going to be connected to all of these buildings and really operate as a single organism. It's not a standalone building, it's really integrated into the campus. Next slide, please. So here's a view taken from the East River in elevation looking west back towards the city. What you see here in blue is the proposed zoning envelope for the pavilion project. I need to emphasize that this is not a building or an architectural design. It is merely an envelope that this team is going to work within to create a building. So we will add articulation and setbacks and window design, etc. But the shape of that envelope is really determined by the program that needs to fit inside this new pavilion building, and then the heights required to create flexibility and adaptability over the long term. What the slide's intended to do is to convey how that zoning envelope compares the adjacent buildings in the Upper East Side, as well as MSK's existing facilities in that purplish color. Next slide, please. So this is a similar but zoomed in view taken along 66th Street looking north. So it's as if we cut the city like a block of ice and we're looking north. You've got First Avenue to the left, York Avenue in the center. And you can again compare how that zoning envelope compares to the existing MSK facilities, as well as other buildings in the vicinity. Next slide, please. So before I turn it over to my colleagues here from Canon Design, who can talk more about the program and technical needs related to the clinical design, we just want to give you an orientation of the stacking of the building. So again, this is not an architectural design. This is merely showing you how the different programmatic elements are going to be arranged within the new pavilion on the left, and as they relate to the existing Memorial Hospital on the right. Very quickly, you can see that the two buildings are joined by a two-story connecting bridge above 67th Street. You can see that there in gray. That is for material and staff and patient transfers between the two buildings so that patients maybe staying in the Memorial Hospital can come to the new pavilion for surgery and vice versa. Also below 67th Street, there's an existing tunnel connecting the two buildings. That's going to be refurbished as part of the new project. If we focus for just a moment on the pavilion, the proposed pavilion on the left, starting from the bottom of the page and working our way up, you can see we have 3 levels of underground parking, which are going to serve visitors and patients. We then have a 2-story lobby, which is being designed, and we'll show you on future slides. You can see how we're pulling the ends of that lobby inward to give more space back to the public realm. And you'll see initial high-level conceptual images of that in a moment. Working our way up, we have our operating floors in green, as well as the clinical support floors, and then the patient floors in blue at the top of the tower. And I think with that, I'll turn it over to Troy and Rob, who can maybe dive into more technical aspects of the clinical planning.
Yeah, thank you, Justin. So you can see from this diagram that the majority, we can leave it here for just a second, the majority of this view, you see a lot of blue and a lot of green, right? It's a very large portion of the mass of the building are those two functions. And so for the next half dozen slides or so, we're going to do a little deeper dive into looking at those inpatient floors and those surgical floors because they comprise so much of the mass of this building and the services that it provides. So we're going to start with the OR floors, and I'm going to hand over to Rob to look at those in more detail.
Thanks, Troy. So if we go to the next slide, we want to talk about the operating room as kind of the clinical surgical building block for the building and really supporting the design of those floors and all of the elements that support the leading edge surgery that Dr. Drebin talked about as we began tonight's session. We've provided some dimensions and some square footages on the plans. These are minimum dimensions that are required for ORs that are designed for specialty and complex surgeries. But beyond those minimum requirements, the leading edge teams that deliver cancer surgery at MSK, who are also leaders in robotic surgery across the country, require the space not only for the equipment necessary to support those surgeries, from the surgical robots to the imaging modalities, the anesthesia equipment, and all of the other peripheral devices required for complex surgical care, but also the space required for the interdisciplinary care team to function effectively in those spaces. So you can see from the plan on the left-hand side, the amount of equipment and required space necessary to deliver complex care of this nature. And on the right-hand side, we've shown a cross-section through that room. And what that shows is not only the space within the room necessary to support the ceiling-mounted equipment and the lights and the technology that support the surgical team around the clinical field, but also above the ceiling, the equipment support space, the laminar air plenum, the mechanical ductwork that supplies the required air changes to these spaces, and the structure above that provides the appropriate support for the vibration criteria necessary for surgical environments of this nature. It requires a significant amount of floor-to-floor height that allows us to develop these state-of-the-art surgical facilities and allows MSK to deliver the level of care that they do every day.
So if you look at those floor-to-floor heights, those dimensions, you'll see it adds up to 18 feet. And we renovate or replace hospitals and surgical departments all across the country, in fact, around the world. And I would say the number one reason that we're unable to renovate a surgical floor for new technology, for new procedures, for just advancing medicine, is a lack of floor-to-floor height. We can work around a lot of things. You know, we can work around columns, we can work around the services, we can upgrade mechanicals. What we really cannot do, though, right, is change the floor-to-floor height once that's been established and built. So it's really critical for the future flexibility of this pavilion in particular, because of the surgical emphasis in the program, that we have the floor-to-floor heights we need, not just for the surgical procedures and technology of today, but of the things that'll be coming, tomorrow.
I can call out one thing on that diagram too, that is the HEPA filtered air supply. And one of the things that happened during the COVID pandemic was we recognized that hospitalized patients have specific requirements within the building structure for airflow, that you can't vent patients who are infected into other spaces because that'll spread infection. And most hospitals were challenged in their airflow requirements during the COVID pandemic. And although I hope in the next 50 to 100 years that we believe this pavilion will be critical to delivering cancer care, we won't see another pandemic. It's certainly possible we'll be in a situation where that air handling will be a critical element, and that's been baked into this structure.
So if we zoom out from the scale of the room to the scale of the floor, we're going to talk about a little bit about the space required to support those state-of-the-art ORs effectively within the floor plate. You can see on the plan that we're showing here 5 ORs that are clustered around support spaces and other elements on the floor. And I just want to take a moment to walk you through what all of those additional spaces are. So you can see on the next slide, we're showing the patient journey coming up to the surgical floor, coming into the preoperative prep spaces at the bottom of the slide, and then the pathway of the surgical teams that are coming up, moving through locker and changing environments and moving into the semi-restricted zone of the surgical suite itself. On the next slide, we show the patient journey into the ORs from that prep space, arriving at an OR for a particular procedure. And so you could see basically the circulation path for both patient and staff coming from the preoperative side, and then the surgical team coming from the top requires all of that support space or the circulation space bringing you around to the ORs. On the next slide, we talk about all of the support space necessary to support this complex care. We have a clean core in the center of those 5 ORs, distributing sterile supplies and equipment and instrumentation to each of those ORs. We have equipment and support spaces around the perimeter that are supplying necessary equipment and turnover space to allow the surgical procedures to occur throughout the day. All of these spaces are really integral to the process flow and the success of the surgical team to deliver that state-of-the-art care. We can take the same analysis to the bed floors themselves, the patient floors where our intensive care units and our medical surgical units will be located. So starting at the scale of the room, we can see the requirements that really drive the size of these single-bedded patient rooms, which are the standard in New York State and across the country for new hospital facilities. The clearances required around the bed for staff access and equipment access for the care team, along with the overhead booms and the technology required, as Liz talked about earlier in the discussion, supporting state-of-the-art care, really drives the size of the room. In addition to all of those requirements, but also providing for the family and the access into the room from the care team. And then similarly in section, we see that same mechanical zone, the importance of delivering the quality air that Dr. Drebin spoke about, and again, the structure required to support the care on the floor, the equipment modalities that are moving around the floor to support the patients, all really driving the design criteria for the patient floors. On this slide, we take a look at the organization of those floors, with the single-bedded patient rooms organized around the perimeter of the floor, allowing for natural light and view for all of those patient spaces. In the center of the plan, there is the staff core providing clinical support spaces and care team spaces directly adjacent to the patients and allowing for effective care delivery for each patient on the floor. And then a zone in the center of the plan for families and loved ones to arrive and support the care team and support their loved ones who are during their patient stay at MSK.
It's typical, good practice design to have a family respite area on a patient floor, especially, however, in this building that's dedicated to cancer patients. It's especially important that we provide a place for families and visitors to be outside of the room and be able to gather and discuss some of the most significant, some of the most difficult moments in the life of a family will occur on these floors. And there's some conversations you don't want to have right at the bedside, but you don't want to leave the floor, right? You're afraid to go too far away. You're afraid to go, something might happen. You might miss a really important event if you go all the way to the lobby, for example. So you need a place to get just off of the patient space, but be really close by in case you're needed right away. So that space up against the glass with a view of the East River, we see as the real heart and soul of this floor for the experience of the families and the really, really difficult or, the really good news and in some cases really devastating news and decisions that they're making on these floors.
I just wanted to point out just on the just one other benefit to those single patient rooms and the way the layout is that improved line of sight for both patients in the room to the hallway and then for nursing staff and clinicians. I don't know if you remember, but it was in the center of the room. We had the wider doorways. And so not only improving the nurses and clinicians' ability to quickly get to the patient and move around that room, but have those clear lines of sight is really important.
You can see here in this diagram kind of really highlighting a lot of the things that we spoke about from the natural light around the perimeter of the building, benefiting those patient spaces, the care team spaces, and the access into those rooms as Liz described, and then that family zone at the heart of the plan, really the focal point of the care destination for families and loved ones.
So this is what it looks like when you start to, again, stack up those floors. This is not, again, a view of the building. This is if the facade was stripped away and you're revealing the floors inside. So again, you'll remember we've got the operating floors in green, the patient floors in blue. You can start to see how that kind of double height family zone and space for staff can be expressed and starts to inform the architecture. This is very much a building that's being designed around the needs of the patients and their family and the staff. So we're designing the building from the inside out, not the opposite, not the other way around. So again, this just shows that if you remove the facade, we've got our below grade parking, our 2-story lobby, and then the clinical floors and how they are kind of arranged in relation to each other. On the next slide, please, is a very early conceptual view of the building. It's still very much in progress and being designed, but from the outset, again, we're designing from the inside out. You can see the expression of that vertical spine of family zones on the outside of the building, as well as the individual patient rooms. And the intent is to create a humane and kind of serene environment for patients and staff. We want the building to be more residential in character in terms of how it's articulated and its materials choices, and less of a kind of sleek office-looking building that you might find in Midtown. So as the design develops further, we're happy to show more advanced imagery, but this is kind of a moment in time at the early stages of the project. On the next slide is a similar view of the ground floor. So this is the corner of 67th and York, looking down York Avenue on the left-hand side and down 67th Street on the right. Here it just really shows you how we intend to pull in the lower portions of the building to give back more space to the public realm and to create a kind of planted garden-like area, potentially with public art, so that as you're entering the building, whether you're a staff member, a patient, or a family member, it does not feel institutional. It has a humane quality, and we're trying to create a serene environment for what can often be a very traumatic experience. What you can also see here is the connecting bridge in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. That's connecting the new Pavilion project to Memorial Hospital to the north. And then just to further describe the kind of lobby and arrival experience, by pulling in the ground floor, which you'll see on the next slide, it enables us to move most of that check-in experience up into the level 2 main lobby. And we're kind of situating that within the tree canopy looking out towards Rockefeller University. So this is another floor plan of the ground floor. We basically pulled the building away and we're looking down from the top onto what is the ground level of the building. So at the top of the screen, you've got 67th Street. The bottom of the screen is 66th, and York Avenue is running north to south along the right-hand side. The kind of warm orange space is our main entry lobby. And you can see how we pull that in from the corners of the block to give more space back to the public realm. And there's some initial thoughts about how we can landscape and plant those areas as well as introduce artwork. Moving to the left, we've got a central valet drop-off. So patients and visitors arriving on our site will bring their cars to that internal site lane and hand their car to a valet before they come into the main lobby. That's really intended to bring as much traffic that's arriving onto our site onto the site and keep it off of the main adjacent roads. And then in gray is our main core. So we pull that way back off York Avenue. And that's going to house back of house items like an oxygen farm and loading dock to the north, as well as a series of elevator banks for different types of visitors. The next slide is a similar view, but just one level up. So this is the main lobby on level 2. And by creating a space where we can have lounges, educational programming, gift shop, et cetera, which we're working through currently, by bringing that up a level, it enables us to really shrink down the size of that ground floor lobby and to give back more to the street. I believe on the next slide, I will turn it over to Shelley, who will walk through some of the zoning actions.
Thank you, Justin. Good evening, everybody. I want to run through the zoning actions that are shown on this slide to facilitate the proposed zoning envelope for the pavilion. All of the requested zoning actions shown here occur in one overall context of a large-scale community facility development previously approved by the Commission in 2001 in conjunction with the Zuckerman Research Center on 68th and 69th Street. The pavilion site is on a zoning lot located entirely within the boundaries of this previously approved large-scale development and builds on those 2001 approvals. The site will utilize the special zoning tools provided in Chapter 79 of the zoning resolution that facilitate the development of community facility buildings in multi-block campus settings. Thus, the approval of the 2 requested text amendments described in Action 2, which will enable the Commission to modify lot coverage and sign regulations, will apply only to hospitals in large-scale developments. Action 3, the proposed modifications to the 2001 large-scale drawings and calculations, will permit the redistribution of zoning floor area within this one large scale for use on the pavilion site. Action 4, a large-scale special permit, will modify height and setback requirements for the pavilion street walls that face York and East 66th, which are on the perimeter of the large scale, and with the approval of the proposed text amendment, will modify lot coverage and sign regulations to improve pedestrian and vehicular wayfinding. Action 5, lesser approvals known as authorizations, and in this case only available within large scales, will modify height and setback on East 67th Street, which is not a perimeter street, and yard requirements. Zoning Action 6 involves updating the various 2001 documents and therefore, again, is limited in scope to the already approved large scale. And finally, while not a zoning action, the ULURP application will include a parallel application to the New York City Department of Transportation for the bridge across East 67th Street that Dr. Drebin stated to be a programmatic necessity and that Justin described. On the next slide, seen here, you see that even with the proposed mid-block zoning amendment in Action 1, it was fully discussed in the 2001 approvals. This slide shows in orange the boundaries of the 3-block 2001 large-scale development, and in red the extent of the proposed 2023 zoning map amendment. The proposed zoning for the South Mid-Block applies only to the lot of the MSK Rockefeller Labs building, which is included in the pavilion zoning lot, shown here outlined in blue. And the pavilion site itself is infilled in the same color blue. This map amendment has some important history, which we need you to understand. Next. Here you see the R8 mid-block zoning in effect prior to 2001. The 2001 ULURP requested that all 3 mid-blocks in the large scale be rezoned from R8 to R9 to support both the now-built Zuckerman building on the north block and a new inpatient facility named in the 2001 application as the future replacement hospital, then proposed for the main campus. This is a page from the 2001 final environmental impact statement with the new inpatient facility shown in blue. The Commission described the new inpatient facility in its 2001 report as a phase 2 project to follow Zuckerman. On June 4th, 2001, the Commission certified the application complete, triggering the beginning of ULURP. Community Board 8 heard the application in July, recommending disapproval without stating its reasons in a short resolution. Here you see that in November, the commission approved only the north and main block mid-blocks. The rezoning on the south mid-block was voluntarily withdrawn without prejudice by MSK prior to the November vote, with an invitation from the commission in its report to reapply once plans for the inpatient facility were further developed. Here is what the commission stated in its report. So as you see, again, they said the commission believes that the south block should remain in the R8 district until the plans for this block are more complete. So what occurred that changed the commission's thinking between the certification in June and all three mid-blocks should be rezoned and this November vote with only two mid-blocks? That event was 9/11. After our CB8 review in July, city planning calendared its hearing for September 12th, 2001. And of course, that hearing did not take place. In fact, MSK and several other applications in the Euler pipeline had technically expired during those dark days because their city planning hearings could not occur within the Euler timeframe in the aftermath of 9/11. The commission, not only recovering on its own, but also by then fully engaged in the rebuilding of Lower Manhattan, did not truly come back online for hearings until late October. The city council had to pass a local law extending MSK's Euler, but could not extend the Euler deadlines beyond its own term, which expired on December 31st. Thus, the commission and MSK had about 40 days to complete 120 days of Euler. In response to that situation, Chairman Joe Rose asked MSK to voluntarily downsize its application by limiting its request for new floor area to only that required for Zuckerman. As you read, deferring the zoning actions for the phase 2 inpatient facility until MSK and the commission had more defined plans and could complete the environmental analyses to support the new inpatient facility. In the spirit of those difficult days, MSK agreed to modify its plan, its application as requested, and that is what was approved. This again is the slide showing the proposed map amendment that we are now pursuing. The pavilion you are now considering represents that phase 2 inpatient facility deferred in 2001 in the days following 9/11, and this map amendment and the other zoning actions represent the resumption of that discussion. This slide shows the results for Action 3, the redistribution of floor area from within the large-scale development to the pavilion site. Light orange represents the 10 FAR floor area resulting from the demolition of Sloan and Scholars. The middle section represents the remaining unused floor area from throughout the large scale that will be redistributed to the pavilion site. And the darker orange on top represents the floor area generated by the R9 zoning map amendment. Just a few more slides, I promise. This next slide shows the zoning envelope to be approved pursuant to these zoning actions. The envelope will permit a building as tall as 594 feet at full lot coverage. Upon approval, there will no longer be any remaining unused floor area in the large scale, which will be fully developed to its as-of-right potential of 10 FAR. There are no bonuses, as of right or otherwise, in these actions. With these approvals, MSK's campus will be a 10 FAR facility. This slide illustrates through the darker gray tone the extent to which the proposed zoning envelope exceeds the applicable sky exposure planes and setbacks. The exceedances to the left on the 66th Street perimeter of the large scale and a similar condition not shown on York Avenue require the large scale special permit. The exceedance setback to the right, East 67th Street, which is within the large scale, requires the large scale authorization. Here is our last slide. This slide shows the zoning lot in plan. Modification via the large scale special permit is requested to increase the existing lot coverage on the zoning lot from 50.2% to 75.5%. Unfortunately, the public spaces described by Justin, a significant improvement over the existing conditions, do not count as open spaces for these lot coverage calculations, and therefore account for most of this increase. A large-scale authorization is also required to modify rear yard equivalent provisions, shown here as the two areas in diagonal hatching on the darker gray pavilion footprint. All of this, for which I appreciate your attention and patience, can be largely explained as a continuation of the land use actions begun in 2001. And now the need to locate in one intricately organized building the 28 ORs, related beds, and support spaces that Doctors Drebin and Gardner and nurses Salgado and McNulty know they will need to meet the already growing incidence of cancer care cases expected over the next 30 years. I want to turn this back to Dr. Drebin to ask if he has any closing remarks as we conclude the presentation.
So just to emphasize what Shelley said, this is not a new hospital. This is not a replacement hospital. This is an addition to our existing facilities, without which we cannot meet the cancer needs of our community over the coming decades. And this building has been designed around the needs of cancer patients for cancer surgery and other forms of complex care. The 28 operating rooms and the patient beds that will help support those patients are critical to this entire project. And yet still, this is only a portion of our cancer care mission. And the main existing hospital will remain critical to everything we do. And that's part of the reason that the Sky Bridge is so important in this work, because we anticipate patients may need to go back and forth for different aspects of care. And certainly family members may also need to traverse, as well as our staff. So I want to thank Community Board 8 for their attention to this and their careful thought and deliberation, and have no other comments and would certainly throw this open to questions. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you all. Shelley, seriously, I could listen to you explain this stuff all day. So you needn't fear boring us or putting us to sleep. I do have a couple of questions while people queue up. One is, I was very quickly counting the number of surgical floors, and I came up with 11. But there are only 28 operating rooms. The example you showed us had, I think, 5 or something like that. Are some of these rooms going to be gigantically big and there will only be one on a floor, or what are we talking about? So that was one question. I can do them all and you can then come back to them. And then the other two questions had to do with the floor to floor. I can understand intellectually the need to have the mechanical systems directly below the structure rather than interwoven through it, even though I think it's a shame, the extra 2 feet, but or 3 feet, in fact. What I'm curious about is why you are proposing 10 feet clear headroom in the patient rooms. And it seems to me that every foot you take out, I know it's only 9 floors, but every foot you take out of every floor begins to make a very tall building a little less tall. And so that would be that would be my other question. So the 2 questions are, what at this point, how come we have 11 floors for 28 operating rooms, and how come you are proposing 10-foot clear, especially in the patient rooms? I can almost imagine it in an operating room, but I think that anyway. But they've disappeared. Have they?
No, we're here.
Oh,
I can-
okay.
We're here. Go ahead.
I can take a first pass at those questions, and thank you for
Okay, great.
for the detailed consideration there. First, as it relates to the number of surgical floors, we talked about kind of a typical surgical floor and how that might be arranged. That is that is kind of a baseline for us. But I think there's two things driving the number of floors beyond what that typical floor plate would demonstrate. First of all, although we showed that we have integrated preoperative prep spaces on the floors, it's the post-operative, post-anesthesia care units, or the PACUs, that will support the patients coming out of surgery that start to fill some of those other floors and provide a centralized area for patients from the operating rooms and from the interventional radiology floors to come and recover before they are admitted to a patient bed floor.
Those are recovery rooms in common terminology. PACU is what we call it, post-anesthesia care.
So that starts to populate some of the kind of the perioperative, peri-anesthesia stack in the building beyond the ORs themselves. To speak a little bit about the height in the patient rooms, one of the things that we showed diagrammatically in those in the section of that room is the introduction of overhead booms in the rooms. And I think given the complexity of care that we're delivering in the intensive care units in particular, having ceiling mounted booms to have the medical gases and the outlets available not only directly at the bedside, but to be able to manipulate them so that patient orientation, major equipment coming into the rooms, whether that is a ventilator or a portable modality such as dialysis, as well as imaging coming into the room, and the ability for the care team to access the patient in an emergent situation, those booms become very vital to the flexibility of the room to provide care. In addition, we've been introducing into the patient setting more and more, both for the safety of the patient as well as the safety of the care team, overhead lifts that allow for patient movement in the room. That allows for a patient to move to and from the patient toilet room, for example, with support from an overhead assembly. It allows the safe transfer of a patient from a stretcher to the bed and vice versa. And it provides for the safety of the care team in allowing for that safe transition of the patient as well. So those overhead devices, whether they are the booms on either side of the bed or the lift mechanisms themselves, really start to drive the need for space within the room to provide for safe and effective care.
Okay, I hear that. And I'm afraid I have to ask a follow-up. Oh, good. People are lining up. And I know that one of the goals here is that when this building is finished, you're going to be renovating the other patient floors and other operating floors. And so how are you going to accomplish that? Because I bet those don't have 10 feet clear and wouldn't. It's just something, in other words, you're going to have sort of terrific rooms going forward and then not very terrific rooms that are going to be better, but they're still not going to be as good as the terrific rooms.
Well, it's true that the existing floor-to-floor heights in the existing Memorial Hospital do pose a challenge. And I think that's a challenge that we face routinely here in the city and around the country, where major urban centers have facilities that are built up of older buildings over time. But I think the ability for us to leverage the pavilion to provide us for the ability to access those floors and renovate them in their entirety, to really gut renovate those floors, rebuild the systems, and rebuild the organization of the floor, it gives us our best opportunity to reposition those floors to their highest and best use in delivering care. But I think that one of the advantages of the pavilion is that it allows us to provide those intensive care unit environments for those sickest and most critical patients in an environment that's optimized for that care, and then utilize the existing memorial floors for for lower acuity patients as those floors are redeveloped.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have for right now. So let me start calling on people. Ed Hartzog is first.
This is just a reminder, if you'd like to participate, look for the reactions icon on your screen and find the raise hand button there.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you. And thank you, folks from MSK. Shelley, always good to see you and have you here. Like Anthony, I listened to you talk about zoning all night long. So I had three areas. I'll be very quick. The second area had to do with floor heights, and so I'll go there first because that's what we're talking about now. I was curious, are all the floors going to be the same same height? You're building this again. You forgive me for my ignorance on that. I was just curious. You know, as we move up the building, there's a reason why I ask.
No, they will be varying heights depending on the functions we anticipate on those floors. So they are sized to be appropriate for the functions that we anticipate. They're not all the same.
Okay, so the patient floors are going to be 15, and the operating rooms are going to be 18.
Right. Correct.
Okay. All right. For some reason, I had it in my mind that we were talking about 20-foot floor plates and okay. Back to the first issue. The first question I had was with respect to staff, and it goes back to something I raised at the last meeting, and I couldn't articulate it. And then I saw it the other night on, of all places, Bill Maher. He made an interesting point about the education industry, and I was thinking about healthcare. In terms of staff, my question is this: not nurses and not doctors, but in terms of just the size and percentages, what's the growth percentage of administrators at MSK relative to doctors and caregivers? And I'm just curious about that. The reason why I asked, so put it in perspective, it was raised at the show I was listening to that something like Stanford had 10,000 administrators and like 5,000 students. So that's why I was getting at. And yeah, exactly. I see Adam laughing. Yeah, that kind of blew me away too. And those aren't the professors. And so that's what I was asking. How many administrators do we have at MSK, relatively speaking, to doctors and nurses?
It would be a guess, but I can tell you I've seen the curves for higher education. And although managing a healthcare operation is more complex than it was 20 years ago, and as acting hospital president, I'm now seeing that maybe more than I ever did as a simple chief of a surgical department. We've not accelerated at the kind of curves that they have in higher education.
And what are the curves? And what are the curves?
I can't give you a number because I don't know it, but I know that it has not been that sort of tenfold or more that higher education has seen.
Okay. Well, if it's, I know we have a series of these meetings coming up. That was just something I would like to know at some point. If you can get that would be something. And the last one is for Shelley, because as always, one of these days I'm going to hit the Powerball. I'm going to win one of these $2 trillion lottos, Shelley. I'm going to build a building, and you're going to be my land use guy. I mean that very sincerely. The question is about the 2001 approval. Is any of that approval, did any of that go stale, relatively speaking? I don't need, just in terms of, it's been a long time, and is there a time limit to some of that? And the other thing I was going to notice is that it was awfully, the timing of it all, but something seemed controversial about the time of that, and it was a disapproval from this board, and I wasn't on the board, but it seems that there was something a little more to it than, very, very horrid timing, of course, but more to it. And that's my twofold question. Is there something about that approval that may or may not have gone bad or stale or needs to be renewed? And was there more to it than just the bad timing around 9/11 in the hearing? Because something strikes me, just gnaws at me.
Well, to your first question, there's nothing stale about any of the approvals. The large scale, the zoning map amendments are final, as every zoning map amendment are, and permanent. the establishment of the large scale is meant to be something that is used over time to develop and strategize for large campuses that cross streets and need to have zoning floor area transferred across streets and things like that. So that's up and active. There was, with the construction of Zuckerman, an accompanying variance that required that the building be completed within a certain time, and it was. So we met our timing obligations from the BSA with regard to Zuckerman. So all across the board, there's nothing that's gone stale. There's nothing that can expire at this point. It's all part of the permanent approvals and part of the zoning resolution. Your second question, provocative as always, is
I like to keep it lively for you, Shelley. I mean,
requires me to recite some of the board history here, and I don't, I'm not your historian, but I will say that what you may be recalling or heard about was that we started a task force for that application, the first ever in Community Board 8. You were then organized under what was known as a community facility expansion committee of the board, institutional expansion, excuse me. And so there wasn't a zoning committee, and land use was not a committee of the whole. So we went to that committee and we formed this task force, and we spent a couple of months, and that task force, I think, worked very hard at developing a resolution which had conditions, and it would have been up to the board whether it was an approval with conditions or denial with conditions, but the conditions were the conditions. And on the night of our hearing in July, about 3 minutes into our public hearing, the chair brought forward a substitute motion with a one-sentence denial. The room was filled with people who had worked on this task force for months, and it was all over in 3 minutes. The substitute motion, one sentence or two sentences of denial, and that was it. So there was a lot of resentment as a result of all of that, and all of it, of course, I think got displaced by 9/11 as that became the critical issue. But what happened as a result was that I think the borough president, Virginia Fields, and your council member, who went on to become Miller, Jeff Miller, kind of tried to broker the community board's concerns, because with all due respect, the community board had pretty much dealt itself out with its one sentence no. And there was nothing really to talk about with the community board anymore. So it was Giff and the borough president who really kind of carried your water through the end of all this, and there was a lot of back and forth with them. As it turned out, our stepping back on the upzoning met with one of your concerns. You were unwilling to go with the full spectrum of the upzoning, given the fact that the inpatient facility that we were suggesting was not as well developed as Zuckerman, for which we had real architectural drawings. So the road kind of came together there. We stepped back in the direction you would have supported, but by your previous actions, the board had pushed away from the table and kind of dealt itself out of the discussions. And you have a much different organization now, and you stay in the game and you write specific resolutions, and we keep working on those issues all the way to the city council. But I think there was probably some sense that the way it happened meant that the community board had little or no role in any of the subsequent discussions, and that may be what you're referring to. But those discussions, detailed discussions, did take place with Virginia Fields and Giff Miller.
Shelley is always, your thoroughness, I can listen to you go on. It's always educational, and that wasn't what I was at. I was just sort of probing around, but I'm glad that I unlocked all that incredible knowledge, and thank you so much for illuminating all that.
Just a function of age, Ed, just a function of age.
You're very modest. Anyway, Shelley and everyone from MSK, thank you. I'm here, even though, again, I always disappear behind the bridge, but it's always great to see you. Hopefully in person one of these days. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you, Ed. Judy Schneider is next. There she is.
Okay, just to fill in a little bit on the past discussion, and I have one question for the architects. We actually had 35 hours of meetings. Barbara Chockey was our chair at the time, and you had to attend at least half of those meetings for the task force or whatever you want to call it to vote. And then at the full board meeting, what substitute resolution was put on the floor and it was defeated by one vote. So I think that everybody should know that the board was very much conflicted. It was half and half, basically, of whether it should go through or it shouldn't. Okay, on to the current building. For the architects, I have a question or a comment for you. I'm living across from an MSK building that went up in the last 10 years. And the glass on the exterior of the building now makes my office the lightest, brightest place you could ever want to be on earth during the day when I'm working and it's not raining out, which is this week, so it's a little different. So I ask you to please, when you consider the exterior of the building, particularly on 66th Street, where you face residences, and then your building is tall and high, whether it'll face residences on the 67th Street side, please consider the type of glass, if you're using glass, that you put into the building, that it's very reflective and it makes it, you have to close your blinds. It makes it so bright. It's difficult to work. So that's just an individual from the community giving you my perspective. I don't know what you'll actually do. You'll come back to us when it's done, but please take that into account. Thank you. And also thank you for your very excellent presentation, all of you.
Okay, thank you, Judy. And we now have Adam Wald.
Thank you. I hope everyone can hear me. And thank you to the MSK team for your presentation. I wouldn't dare challenge the requirements, the space programming, anything you need in the building. And as everyone on the community board knows, I'm not someone who's going to stop a tall building from being built. But I reiterate the question I brought up at our last meeting, which was, what is your plan to replace the 150 housing units you are demolishing in the densest neighborhood in the United States? It's more of a question and a request. You know, for a while, went out and spent $70 million, bought a parcel and is building 221 units for their students. I know we don't have students here necessarily, but we are still getting rid of housing units in the densest neighborhood in the country. And I would hope that there is a serious effort to replace the housing units you are getting rid of.
It's a great question, Adam. What we've done is two things, the strategy. First, we invested $100 million on a development site at Roosevelt Island to pick up some of those lost units. About 200 of those units, we're losing about 300 units. 200 of those are going to get replaced at Roosevelt Island. The balance is going to get absorbed within our existing residential portfolio. So we've made some accommodations. We have enough vacancies to accommodate the remainder of those displacements.
But that will still be displacing others who are already in that inventory within the neighborhood. There's nothing creating new units.
No, it won't displace it. We're going to absorb them within existing MSK-owned facilities. So we have vacancies in existing MSK-owned facilities that we're going to absorb that remaining balance that isn't built out in Roosevelt Island.
And are those the facilities on, I know there's one on 71st Street?
We have several. We have about 8 or 9 different facilities throughout the neighborhood.
Okay. But I still think it's not, you're not adding, we're getting rid of and we're not adding, we're not replacing the units. And we're not replacing sufficient number of units, but I don't know that we've seen the plan, so is that something that's being addressed in the next meeting?
We do have an item out, we do have an upcoming task force meeting where we've listed housing as a discussion topic. You're leading us into that, but we will continue it with greater depth when we come together at that meeting.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you, Adam. And now we have Nina Brody.
Thank you. I wanted to ask a follow-up to Anthony's question about the height. Is there any amount of height you can take off these rooms? Because the only thing that I think was a great presentation, the only thing is the height of the building that seems to be a bit of a challenge. So I don't, even if it's half a foot, having lived with a very ill patient, my husband with a Hoyer lift in the house and all, we didn't have 10-foot ceilings and it all worked fine. So I'm just wondering if there's any height that you could take off any of these floors. And then the second question is one sky bridge enough?
We lost the last half of your question, Nina.
Is one sky bridge enough?
Do you want to take?
Sure. Yeah. So I think it's a great question. We appreciate it. We have really thought very hard about the strategy behind the floor-to-floor heights. I think, as Troy noted, during our presentation, what we're really trying to protect against as MSK is building this new facility to expand the campus, importantly, is to preserve the flexibility, the future flexibility of this building, so that it is an investment in the community's care for many decades forward, and that we don't suffer the same challenges that we discussed earlier related to the definite challenges that we will face in renovating Memorial Hospital in the future. So the infrastructure requirements, both for the air systems, for the technology backbone, and for the building structure necessary for a modern hospital facility, those are all really driving that overall height, particularly both for the patient floors themselves as well as the surgical environments. I think, just to touch on the bridge connection as well, it is intended to be a 2-floor bridge. So the goal is that we have the ability for patient movement as well as for staff and for material movement, so that we can manage the patient flow back and forth between the main campus and the new pavilion, both for staff movement, for critical services like lab and pharmacy that are supporting and have facilities on both sides of the street, as well as the patient care services that will remain on the Memorial campus, critical services such as radiation oncology, infusion, some of the specialty imaging services that will require pavilion patients to move across the bridge back to the main campus. So it is envisioned as a 2-story bridge connection, in addition to the existing tunnel connection, which will also continue to provide connectivity back across the street as well.
One other thing, I was at University of Pennsylvania for a number of years before I came here 6 years ago. They have big, long, almost city block, long bridges. This is a quite short bridge that's going to cross the street. So the bottlenecks that happen in bridges are related to length. So if you can come in, get across, and spread back out, that'll make it a much easier bridge to manage. And the 2 floors we anticipate would take care of the crowds when they might be likely to happen.
No, I was actually asking if you needed another. I wasn't like commenting that was a bad thing. I was just thinking you might even need more cross back and forth, but you've decided you don't. I have one last quick question. Are any of the windows in the patient rooms allowed to open, or is that not allowed?
It's not allowed because we will have patients in the facility with severely compromised immune systems, so they will not open.
Well,
There's
in
also,
your hospital, they don't allow it, even if it's not. I was just curious, is that a hospital regulation? Because having had somebody in the hospital so much, it's so nice to get fresh
Right.
air, but it's not allowed.
air change.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's driven that evolution in recent years are the air change requirements in the patient rooms themselves, and and managing the pressure relationships necessary, as well as the filtration necessary in those environments. So while in years past there was opportunity for operable windows that often had fixed limitations on how much or how far they could open, the requirements of the modern mechanical systems ultimately drive that operable window.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. That was a good question, by the way. Kathleen Steed, please.
I'm a patient, and I can't say, just curious about what this was all about, and I happened to tune in. When you're talking about the hospital and the height, the whole hospital, what they're describing sounds wonderful from what is present at the moment. And in comparison, sorry about that. In comparison with, apparently it is a zoning law, but in comparison with these freaky 85-story buildings and that kind of thing, seems perfectly rational. And two other things, these are minor kinds of things. This is the Koch building. I have understood from people who work there that there's no padding beneath the concrete of the floor, and it's very difficult to walk. Okay, that's A. And B, in the parking facilities, there's no bicycle. They have no bicycle accessibility, so that people who ride bicycles can't park at the Koch Center. And these are really minor, but I thought, okay, since I have this opportunity to speak up, I would. And anyway, basically the place sounds great. And although I'm a patient, I hope not to be a patient and see all those wonderful things. I'd like to hear about them, though. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. Well, I'll just follow up her question. Is there any thought to having bicycle parking in the parking garage, or is the parking garage going to be all valet, or?
There will be bicycle parking either within the parking garage or more likely in close proximity to the entrance on the ground floor level. Working through that now.
Yep.
Okay, thanks. Before I get to Marco, one thing is sort of nagging at me a little bit. And I understand that what we're looking at here is what you've shown us represents the maximum zoning envelope that brings the entire large-scale development up to FAR 10. Okay, now, if this building is carved or shaped at all beyond its volume, you will have less floor area in the building. And so the question is, won't you no longer be at FAR 10, but at FAR 9 point something or other, leaving odd square feet to put someplace else?
It's certainly possible, Anthony. I mean, that's not the intent. We want to max out the zoning envelope. We only want to go to 10 and then call it a day. But you're absolutely right that if there is some articulation in the building, some setback or what have you, that there probably would be some square footage available.
Okay. That's what I thought. I was just,
but not enough to generate another building or anything of the kind.
No.
On the main campus,
I understand.
5-8 stories tall. So there'd be a couple new conference rooms or perhaps a new procedure room here or there, but that's probably it.
Okay, I was just curious because it wasn't quite making sense to me since I have to do this myself. Marco Tamayo, please.
Thank you, Anthony. First of all, I had to say that nobody questioned at all your medical services. I think your medical service is one of the best. So thanks for that service for the humanity. It means we don't question your skills or your professional at all. On the contrary, we are grateful for that. However, you know that the building high is too big, and that has nothing to do with the medical services. And thank you, doctor, to coming right here from Canada. You are very close now. You see, the technology works everywhere. Everything is very close. So the technology, we don't know what's going to happen in about 20 years. Not far away, we used to use the pay phones, and now we have those phones that they can talk to you. So the technology is immense. So let me go in 3 areas. My first area is, I said already, the height of the buildings. I think that it's too excessive, and you can have a different location, but I don't want to discuss right now this part. The part that I would like to concentrate more is sustainability. Now that the professional said the function is done, now follow the form. If that is correct. If that is correct, I think the fellow community Schneider clearly established one point, very strong point. Are you going to build a passive building or a net zero building, or none?
Net zero.
Yeah, net zero for a hospital. So of all the building types in the world, other than maybe a laboratory building, we use the most air, we use the most energy. We're the most kilowatt per hour per square foot intense of any building use out there. There has begun to be talk of how you would get to a net zero hospital. I'm not aware of anybody who's gotten close to it yet. Basically, the only way you could get to net zero is to purchase green energy. You're not going to be on site net zero. That's literally a physical impossibility. Right now, there are hospitals that are looking at fully offsetting their load from the field next door, right, or buying it from a wind farm. That you could do. So right now, the whole net zero discussion in the healthcare space anyway, really is about where you buy energy. It's not so much about reducing the loads. Obviously, we're going to be very careful about the loads. We are looking at, LEED certification and so on for the building. So there will be energy modeling, all those things that we'll be looking at. But getting it all the way to a true net zero really isn't feasible right now.
We can also add,
very well. I'm sorry.
MSK has made a very clear point from the outset of the project that this needs to be a sustainable building. It is inherently going to be an energy intensive building because of the type of medicine and science that's being conducted inside. We're taking huge steps to deal with the envelope design, the way it meets the ground floor, the types of systems we're putting in the building to drive down energy use as much as we can. And they've made serious investments from the outset in that process. So it is something that's very, very critical to this entire team that we're looking at every day, I can assure you.
Just only to give a good example is Cornell is doing thermal in their campus. So basically they're harvesting energy right there.
Yeah.
Even though they messed up with those buildings, but one of the building is passive building. Okay, one of them is passive building. So it's doable. And that's what I keep asking. Is that you're planning or does it not? Because keep in mind, LEED's project is a commercial certification. This is not sustainable project. Okay, so I would like to know if you have a commitment to produce a passive building or not. If you say no, that's fine.
When you say passive, are you referring to the passive house certification in terms of
No, there is no passive certification. You have to design in order to preserve and reduce the loads as much as you can. In other words, you use the load that you really need to be used inside of the building. You don't have to put like Judy said clearly, you reflect the lights against her. You create too much excessive glassing that like it looks like the patient's going to the hospital to be on the windows. But as a patient, I was once a long time ago. The only thing that I don't want to be is in the hospital, and I want to run away as soon as possible, not to be watching any view from the building, from the inside of the building out. So, and that's I'm asking you if you have a plan to do that or not.
So I think we can say emphatically that sustainable design is influencing every aspect of this project. You know, the design of the envelope and all of the systems in the building. We are trying to drive down energy use. Energy is expensive, right? And we want to minimize the amount that we're spending cooling and heating the building. It's not going to be an all glass tower, right? We touched on that earlier, and we're doing everything to create a more insulated envelope. So there's an enormous effort focused on exactly these issues to drive down energy use.
And actually, if you can Google this, MSK, their engineering group, their facility management group is actually a leader nationally in driving down the energy consumption of their portfolio of buildings, but also teaching other hospitals how to do it. One of the first things when I came on this project was we did do a tour of the top of the Koch building and the way that they're recycling energy and heat capture and that kind of thing that they're doing in that project that we do hope to extend into this project. It's a little early right now for us to kind of say where we're going to land, but we are absolutely studying very carefully just how far down we can push the energy consumption. That is absolutely on the table for the design team. It has been from day one of the project.
So let me ask the doctor this question. Doctor, your patients, you would like to have the best air available, or you want to have the regular available air for your patients? I'm sorry, I'm not trying to insult you. I'm sorry.
I would like the very best of everything for my
I agree
patients.
with you. That was I expecting that. And that's basically, that is connected exactly what I discussed with sustainability. The more loads, the more energy you use, the more carbon emissions you have. The more carbon emissions you have, the more contaminated air we have in the community. And not only for the community, but the building itself, because the same air, it has to go back inside of the facility. And if you go back inside of the facility, you need to have a very extremely dense filter, which basically is going to be structurally working even harder. It's going to be even more expensive. And that's in the dimensions I'm trying to ask and demonstrate that these buildings, this type of buildings, actually it helps your work, your task, doctor, because actually you provide your excellent services, but you have to be complemented with an excellent recuperation area. And if those buildings become a pollutant, like in this case, that the designer is unwilling to say, yeah, I can do, I understand net zero. This is a lot of, it's too much, but maybe I ask that maybe are willing to do that. But my question is basically passive building is doable to do that. Cornell University proves that. So it's nothing, I'm not asking nothing more than what is reasonable in that direction. And so therefore they said, you doctor mentioned that the COVID, well, that is a serious trouble over there. And I'm still asking some expert in that matter, because I want to see what's going on in that part, learn, because the more qualified in that area, the better for the humanity. So my concern is basically this building is usually the traditional building that we see on the corridor, like the counselor said, of York Avenue or the hospitals. So I think that is my one concern that I have, because since you bring the professionals and the professionals reluctant to put the cladding, because once you have the function follow the form. Very simple. And then you have to provide something that we can see it, or you want to hide until the end and coming with a surprise. And I think that is completely wrong. On the contrary, it should be more clear and straightforward. And well, I'm going to leave right there, and I'm going to keep persistent in that area. And I think is if you go Oh, by the way, doctor, it's very expensive to waste energy because you gotta pay not only to use inside of the building, but also to some some of the buildings are actually some big radiators in the city, and so we had to stop that. We coming with the building department is coming with the local law 97, would establish perfectly for each use, in this case, even the medical, the maximum amount of the carbon emissions. So they calculate now, there is a calculation right for each of the uses. It's not only just only for residential. They understand that these facilities needs more energy, that they reasonable, they understand that part. So my goal is to ask them if really they do in that direction. And with respect to the height, well, I will come in another session to discuss deeper, and it has to be with technology, and transportation is still a big issue, still a mystery. And finally, counselor, you offered to give it to us the first session. The second session said, oh, I don't have the information. Information is gonna be put in everything over there. And luck. I wish that we can have a judge in front of him, and that will be more straightforward and sincere our communication in land use. Otherwise, it's because you said and I said. And thank you so much for your time, and thank you for the questions. And again, doctors, thank you so much for your medical service for the entire humanity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And as a parent of a number of children, I know how expensive energy is, and I know what happens when the lights stay on all night long. And I can tell you that part of the charge to our design team is to do this as efficiently as possible. So I can't tell you the details, but I can tell you it's fundamental to their project to try to do that as well as possible. And I certainly agree with your comment. I think you opened up talking about the future, and we can't predict the future. As you say, I was in Toronto, now I'm here. But I think one thing we know about the future is we are going to see an avalanche of cancer cases in our nation, in our community, and we have to be ready for it. And this design is our response to what we know is coming and what we anticipate we will need to deliver the care that will cure more and more patients of cancer in the coming decades. So thank you so much for your comments, Marco.
So thank you. I have a couple of questions since I don't see any other hands up. Again, very informative discussion today and presentation. Really appreciate all the information. You mentioned the tunnel and that it was going to be rehabbed. Is that a future project, or will that be part of the current project? I wasn't clear on that.
That will be part of the current project.
Current project, yeah, current scope, yep.
And are you planning any setbacks to the building?
We are reviewing that now. We are, as I said before, we're designing the building from the inside out. So as the program and requirements firm up, it's informing what we can do on the exterior. It's very much not a cake that we're decorating on the outside, then trying to fit everything inside. We're working our way from the inside out, and we're looking at opportunities to create either setbacks or shapes to the building. But it's still very early. I think you'll see more progress when we come back to you in due course.
Thank you. And I like the streetscape that you were showing in front of the building and the increased pedestrian space, and especially the way you were taking cars off the road to address traffic issues, although we'll get more into that. Are you planning other streetscape improvements around your other facilities in the area?
It's something that we're looking at in terms of how the pavilion fits into the rest of the campus. So we haven't quite finalized those plans, but we're trying to figure out how the pavilion fits in with the rest of the main campus.
And then two final questions. Are you planning on this being a union job? Union construction?
I think typically when you build a building of this scale, it primarily is union labor. We're working through that, but the vast majority of it's going to be union labor, yes.
Will there be a project labor agreement?
We haven't gotten to that point yet with the discussions with the CMs, but it's under consideration.
Okay, and then my final question, the state just passed a gas ban on new buildings. I believe there's an exception for hospitals, but I just wanted to confirm that doesn't impact you. You don't have to be
Yeah.
all electric.
We are, as part of the initiatives we just talked about sustainability, we are trying to go as electric as possible. We plan to push the boundaries actually on electrification of this project. We hope to really be a leader in that in the inpatient architectural space. But my understanding of the planning right now, and again, this is early, is that we are planning for some gas that we think we still need for clinical purposes. But we're also looking at alternatives to that. So we could eventually be fully electric.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And we
Okay.
just get back to the union construction issue. You said primarily union labor. I would like to encourage this to be all union labor. So just wanted to throw that out there. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, I see Judy has her hand raised again, and I think we can go ahead and call on her again.
Yeah, it's just a quickie. Felice reminded me when she said about plantings around other buildings. Your Schwartz building on First Avenue used to have years ago planting on it. Now it's all the bus stop and then all concrete into the entrance of the building. And it's right across from a city park. It would be really nice if you looked at the front of that building and maybe put back some of the benches and some greenery in there. On 67th Street across from the school, you have little curved gardens, and it just makes the street look so nice. So I suggest that might be one block with very little cost probably to you that you could help improve the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Another very good suggestion. All right. Elise, did you have any other comments?
I do not have any other comments. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for being here today, this evening. Especially thanks to the entire team from MSK, all together in a room and virtual, or I guess we're all virtual. I guess we will see you all in 2 weeks, unless you guys have something additional you would like to add.
I think we're good.
Just thank you.
Anthony, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Terrific. Thank you
Anthony,
all.
before
Thank
we
you.
Okay.
let all the board
Yeah.
members go, I want to ask our board members, everyone else can leave, board members, you should have received an email from our office earlier yesterday and then today about a street fair that's coming up this weekend. If you have availability, please let us know if you can volunteer. We really need an extra couple of hands who can come out and make sure we're able to table at that street fair. So please find that email if you haven't already volunteered and you can. It would go a long way to making sure that we have representation at the local community. So thank you, and that's all I needed to say. I just had enough of you
Thank
together.
You,
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.